It was evident that this outcome was inevitable, given the circumstances. The day was Friday, the time was evening, and the weather was summer-like. The temperature of the beer I was drinking was optimal, and the Cubs were winning against the Cardinals on the television. My German Shepherd, Rice, was sleeping next to me, waking only to join in my celebrations. The house was otherwise silent, as my wife, Tracy, was visiting a neighbor and my son, aged 18, was not home. My son, aged 18, and my 17-year-old my older daughter was staying overnight with friends, leaving me and my dog to our own devices. I had purchased Corona beer and limes earlier in the day, and I opened the refrigerator to retrieve them. I was pleased to find that I had not forgotten to do so. I felt a sense of anticipation as I heard the front door open. I opened and closed the door, assuming it was my wife returning from a visit to her old friend Lisa. I heard her move around the front of the house, but I did not hear her call out to me in greeting as she usually did. I considered this unusual, but at that precise moment, Cubs manager David Ross proceeded to bring out his starting pitcher in the fourth inning, despite the Cubs already having a significant lead. This decision provoked a strong emotional reaction in me, causing me to wake the dog once again. It must have been at least 5 minutes before Tracy finally made it to the living room. She appeared to be in a contemplative state, and perhaps also somewhat nervous. She did not approach me directly. She approached the chair and leaned in for a kiss as was her custom. However, she did not kiss me. Instead, she sat down on the edge of the sofa to the left of my chair. I watched her with one eye while I followed the game with the other. She then asked, "Can we talk for a minute?" Her voice was barely audible over the noise of the television. By this point, I immediately focused my attention on her. I observed that she had perspiration on her forehead and was breathing rapidly. I considered the possibility that someone we knew might have fallen ill or died. "Can you turn off the television, Bob?" she inquired, clenching and unclenching her fists while turning off the television. She was aware that her question pertained to a Cubs game, and it was evident that she was inquiring about a matter of grave importance. It was not merely a matter of illness, it was something more serious. My own physical discomfort, manifested as an unpleasant sensation in my lower abdomen, prompted me to immediately turn off the sound. "What happened, baby? You don't look well. Has someone died?" "No, nobody died," she replied, her response coming quickly. "It's just that. This is of great importance to me, and I must ensure that you are listening to me fully." I nodded without speaking, and a congestion of negative thoughts formed in my mind. We sat gazing at each other for at least half a minute, and I observed fear in her eyes, as well as another emotion, which I believe may have been anger. "You are aware that I love you completely, and I would never cheat on you. I would never date another man behind your back." This was not the question I was anticipating. The dinner I had eaten earlier in the evening, and the 2 beers I had consumed during the game, suddenly seemed to resurface. On the living room floor, I nodded again, silently. "I am 45 years old, Bob. In my entire life, I have only slept with one man besides you." She began, "I am still an attractive woman. My friends even say that I am a hot mom. I want to sleep with another man just once so I can feel the thrill of meeting a new man, another man, one more time before you and I grow old together." I was taken aback by this proposition. I sat motionless, unsure of how long it had been since she had spoken. It seemed as if a speeding train was passing right next to my ears. I was incredulous. "No, absolutely not," I shouted back, jumping out of my chair. "This won't happen as long as I'm—" She gazed at me with wide eyes as I paced back and forth. It must have been a dream. I must have fallen asleep in my chair and found myself in the middle of a nightmare. "This has nothing to do with you and me, Bob. It is about me and my needs as a woman. As far as you are concerned," she continued, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each utterance, "I believe I have been a commendable wife and mother throughout my life. I have consistently prioritized the well-being of my family. However, I feel it is now time for me to prioritize my own needs. I desire to feel like a sexually attractive woman. A woman in control of her life should not feel like a sexually attractive woman with me." I inquired, realizing that my tone of voice was that of a whiny loser. I tell you that I love you all the time. I believe that I am constantly demonstrating to you that you are a sexually attractive woman. I still have sexual desire for you, and I am fairly certain that I am not concealing it. You do, and I appreciate it, but it's about something else. My ego still requires validation from men other than you. It is flattering when other men acknowledge you. It is gratifying to imagine that another man would desire me in that way. Do you not feel good when you see a woman looking at you or flirting with you? I am not. I am aware that I am different from others. I enjoy it when people look at me with lust. After all this time, I want more. I would love to experience going on a date, getting wine and dinner, and then another man taking you and lusting after you just for one night. I would then come home to you. I desire to be your wife and mother, a simple and devoted partner for the remainder of my life. I am not merely a wife and mother, I am so much more. I am a woman of substance, and I am worthy of your love and respect. I cannot bear the thought of you being with another man. I will not allow you to leave me for another. You have told me that you love me, but your actions do not reflect this. I am waiting for you to demonstrate your love for me in a tangible way. She inquired as to how much he loved her and requested that he demonstrate this by allowing her to do something that would be a significant departure from their established relationship dynamic. He responded that it would be a grave mistake for her to allow him to do this, suggesting that if he truly loved her, he would not even ask. I have been a devoted wife and a loving mother to our children. Shouldn't that entitle me to some degree of freedom in my personal relationships? You had numerous sexual partners before we married, whereas I was the only woman you were intimate with. I am merely attempting to achieve a sense of equilibrium in our relationship. She responded that we had never discussed the issue of infidelity before we got married. All we really discussed was our beliefs regarding fidelity after marriage. I have only engaged in sexual intercourse with 4 women in my lifetime, including you. This is not a particularly extensive list. I then stated, I always assumed that you had more experience than me. She replied, you know much more than I do. I have read extensively on this topic. She expressed a desire to provide me with as much pleasure as possible, which made it challenging for me to accept her proposition. She not only responded with a definitive no, but also indicated that she would be consulting with a lawyer the following morning to initiate divorce proceedings. I was taken aback by her response, but she managed to articulate her understanding. It must have been challenging for you to request a pass, which indicates a high level of commitment to this matter. It suggests that you are not inclined to accept a less assertive approach. I observe that this would likely result in your pursuing alternative avenues to achieve your desired outcome. I currently lack the confidence to trust that you will not take such actions, given that you have already demonstrated a willingness to do so. It was merely a ruse to gain permission retroactively. I reiterate that I have not engaged in sexual intercourse with anyone, as I swore to you. I assured you that I would not cheat on you, and I stand by that assertion. Now that I am aware of your desire, you might believe that engaging in sexual intercourse with another person would not constitute cheating. However, I maintain that it would be a betrayal of our relationship. Her inability to maintain eye contact conveyed to me all that I needed to know. She was eager to destroy our family, despite the fact that I had not yet done anything to warrant such a response. She inquired, in a hoarse voice, whether I had finally mustered the courage to make my request. This indicated that I had been planning this course of action for a considerable length of time, which led me to conclude that I had already selected a specific objective. It is likely that he was involved in the planning of this incident. Luncheon dinners. You have already been unfaithful to me, at the very least emotionally. She displayed a sudden change in complexion, her face taking on a bright red hue, as she became aware that I was regarding her with a look of disbelief. You don't need to know, Bob, she said in a quiet voice. I concede your point. Nevertheless, I am entitled to know the name of the person who is responsible for the deterioration of what I had assumed to be a blissful marriage. You can tell me or I can. She suggested that I call all of my close friends and also my boss and all of my colleagues and ask them. I said, you would be well advised to do so. She began to say, I would not, but I interrupted her. What do I have to lose? My life is in a ditch, and my marriage is falling apart. What should bother me? What about my embarrassment? She squealed. I gave a shrug and attempted to conceal my smile. I inquired about the name, Dan Wilson. She replied in a quiet voice, "Please, Bob, don't hurt him. I can't guarantee anything." I then proceeded to grab the remote and turn the game back on. She emitted a chuckle, brushed away her tears, got up from the couch, and went upstairs. I proceeded to the bedroom, where I observed the remainder of the Cubs game. However, I was unable to retain any information from the screen. I can confirm that I remained in front of the television for a minimum of 2 additional hours, although I believe I managed to conceal the majority of my emotions from my wife and I were actually devastated. I had no idea that my wife was planning to sleep with another man. In retrospect, I should have recognized the signs of her dissatisfaction with me or her life. Over the past 3 months, Tracy had become somewhat distant, not only from me but also from our children. In fact, my daughter Sherry was the first to notice, asking me if Tracy and I had been arguing. I also noticed that the intimacy between us had decreased. The frequency of sex dropped from 2 or 3 times a week to once every 2 weeks. This was not due to a lack of effort on my part. I wondered if some early changes were subsequently. There were instances of phone calls being received outside the room, which was a highly unusual occurrence until recently. In addition, there were almost constant evening text messages. When I inquired about this, she stated that it was Lisa who was experiencing difficulties with her husband, Jerry. This was particularly intriguing because Jerry and Lisa lived just 3 doors down from us, and I was previously unaware that they were facing any challenges. I spent the remainder of the weekend contemplating my options. I informed Tracy of my intention to file for divorce as expeditiously as possible, but first I needed to investigate every aspect of it, my marriage and my family. I could certainly comprehend how another man could desire my Tracy. She was a woman of considerable beauty when I first encountered her. At the age of 45, she was only 5 kilograms heavier despite having 2 children. Her breasts were of a generous size, complemented by a firm posterior, and her face gave the impression of a woman in her mid-30s. I have always been curious about how I came to know Tracy. She was clearly above my social standing. I am not a troll, I am merely an ordinary individual. I am not lacking in physical attractiveness, but men who resemble me do not often date the prom queen. She was merely 3 years ago a high school senior in junior high. We both took the same astronomy class at Purdue University. I took it merely for recreation, while Tracy needed the course to fulfill her academic requirements. I am somewhat of a nerd in that sense, and Tracy realized it became evident that I would be willing to assist her in passing the examination, given that science was not her forte. As the first semester was drawing to a close, we were engaged in study sessions in my dormitory room when Tracy leaned over and kissed me forcefully on the lips. I reciprocated the kiss with equal fervor. Despite the passage of the majority of the semester, I remained uncertain about her sexual orientation. However, upon our separation, Tracy informed me that regardless of the attire I wore, I never appeared to arouse her interest. I was intrigued, but I would not have assumed such a thing. Was it mutual? I was merely attempting to refrain from displaying excessive enthusiasm. I posited that we had become exceptional partners. I lacked considerable sexual experience, but I presumed that she was even less experienced than I was because she never expressed discontent and seemed quite content with the sexual activities I attempted with her. I had engaged in extensive reading on the subject while the other men my age were watching pornography. I had read about the sexual activities that everyone was watching with Tracy. This proved to be advantageous from the outset. At the beginning of the second instance of sexual intercourse, I caused her to faint by stimulating her genital area with my tongue. Initially, I was concerned because none of my 3 previous sexual partners had ever fainted. However, I decided that she was fine because she was still breathing when she opened her eyes 2 minutes later. 2 years after completing secondary education, our son was born, followed by our daughter 3 years later. We were financially stable at that point. As I was an IT professional and she was employed in a bank, when she resumed her duties shortly after our youngest child commenced studies at the local school, our son was preparing to embark upon his first year at Ohio State University in a couple of months, and our daughter was on the cusp of commencing high school in 2 short years. We were on the precipice of becoming orphans. Over the past few months, we have been engaged in discussions regarding our future, including travel. I have been in a relationship with this woman for almost 23 years. Refusing her request seemed unduly harsh, yet I had already observed that her asking for permission to cheat was a significant issue. I was not unacquainted with the situation. I was aware that if she was so eager to be permitted to cheat, she would be sufficiently motivated to act behind my back, particularly since she had already informed me of her intentions and did not consider it to be cheating. However, there was also the matter of. Furthermore, she and Dan Wilson were already engaged in an emotional affair and had planned a night of physical infidelity together. I am unsure if I will ever be able to forgive this. I contacted my divorce lawyer on Monday morning and made an appointment for Thursday afternoon. Meanwhile, on the home front, Tracy attempted to persuade me not to file for divorce. We had not engaged in any sexual activity, and we would not be engaging in any sexual activity in the future. Tracy became emotional because you do not want a divorce or because it is evident that this course of action is morally reprehensible. I inquired as to her opinion, yet she averted her gaze and did not respond. You are still anticipating a change of heart on my part and the granting of your request. This has the unfortunate consequence of making you appear optimistic, which in turn predetermines the outcome of our situation. I submitted the case to the court a week after meeting with my lawyer. We resided in a prosperous state and our income was approximately equal, thus making financial matters relatively straightforward. There were few children in our household, and housing issues were addressed as they arose. The custodial parent was responsible for the child's upkeep for 1 year. We would sell the house and split the proceeds. This was completed in 21 years. However, it was not a straightforward process. Tracy hired a lawyer who was highly skilled in this area. They were able to convince the judge to order 4 sessions of psychological help. This could be extended if necessary. The consultant was a woman in her my 30s. I shared the same opinion as my children and Tracy. Given that my wife had not actually committed adultery, I was perplexed by my own inclination towards divorce. I conveyed this sentiment to the counselor, reiterating what I had previously conveyed to Tracy and my children. I posited that her request to engage in sexual intercourse outside of our marriage was tantamount to a breach of our vows. As a result, I was no longer able to trust her as a marriage partner. Despite this, I retained a degree of affection for her. To a certain extent, I was able to maintain a sense of trust, but I was unable to remain married to a woman I could not trust. I will never engage in such behavior again. Bob, I do not require the presence of another individual in my life, I am only interested in you. She implored him repeatedly throughout the 2 sessions. He was unwavering in his conviction. The consultant observed that he was unable to change his mind. In order to facilitate a smooth divorce, my personal opinion is of no consequence, nevertheless, I am going to offer it to you. In my view, you are making a significant error in judgment. Your wife has not engaged in sexual infidelity, at least not to your knowledge. It appears that you would benefit from marriage counseling in order to salvage your marriage. Your wife is willing to make any concessions necessary to preserve your marriage, and I winced and sighed, recognizing the emotional investment in the situation. I loved Tracy deeply and made this decision after considerable reflection. There is a distinction between your perspective and mine, Dr. Baker. You characterized it as a concession, but I view her promise to be faithful as a commitment to honor the vows she made to me 21 years ago. I have explained my in-laws. My mother-in-law exhibited a profound emotional response when Tracy informed her of the impending divorce. The following day, my mother-in-law contacted me and proceeded to launch a series of verbal attacks, lasting approximately 15 minutes, during which she took only one breath. This outburst occurred shortly after I greeted her. The more rational of the 2 parties took the phone from her while she was still screaming. She did not cheat on him and they had been married for 21 years. He was irrational and yelled at her. She told him what had happened and he made small sounds of disagreement. He said, "Really?" and she continued. At the end of the conversation, he seemed depressed. He apologized and hung up. The following week, she moved into a 2-bedroom apartment. My daughter has elected to reside in the adjacent bedroom apartment with my wife for the forthcoming academic year. However, I considered a second room to be a beneficial addition, should either of the children desire to remain for an extended period. They expressed disquiet, although they appeared to comprehend the rationale behind my decision to divorce their mother. A cordial telephone conversation with my neighbor, Jerry, ensued a few days after I relocated to my apartment. I informed him that his wife, Lisa, was instrumental in formulating my wife's plans with Dan Wilson, and that Tracy had alleged that he and Lisa were experiencing marital difficulties. I informed him that I did not believe he was responsible for the dissolution of my marriage, but that his wife was somehow involved. Given the closeness of his relationship with Tracy, it was also possible that Lisa was seeking a younger, more attractive partner. During our conversation, Jerry became incoherent and seemed to be under the influence of a narcotic substance. This raises the question of whether I might also face similar challenges. The advent of social media has both positive and negative implications. In my case, it provided a wealth of information about Dan Wilson without the need for a private investigator, saving me a significant amount of money. Wilson was a colleague of Lisa. He had transferred to the local office from Cleveland approximately 6 months prior to the dissolution of my marriage. He was engaged to be married to an attractive woman who was still seeking employment in our city. Consequently, he returned home almost every weekend to see her. I was uncertain as to whether Tracy was aware of the man's fiancée. With the exception of the telephone conversation I had with Wilson's fiancée, which took place shortly after this, everything had fallen apart. I subsequently learned from various sources that Dan's wedding had been called off, and his fiancée had informed him that he could resume his relationship with his former girlfriend. I should mention that his fiancée was the daughter of a very wealthy man. This information became available to me 2 weeks prior. The divorce was final. Tracy and I had celebrated 22 years of marriage. I was experiencing emotional distress about the loss, but the longer I sat watching Swanson TV before dinner, the more I was convinced that I had made the right decision. I would have spent the rest of my life searching for evidence. I was certain that she would have been unfaithful to me had I remained married. I was acutely aware that she would eventually find a way to cheat on me. She was highly competitive and saw any setback as a personal defeat that needed to be rectified. I consumed a single malt and retired to bed by 10 p.m. On this anniversary, I am gratified to report that my telephone rang at approximately 1 a.m. I observed that the caller was none other than my former spouse, Tobe. I considered allowing the call to go to voicemail, but since I was already awake, I answered it. "GH, she screamed. It was evident from the tone of her voice that she was not faking. There was another unintelligible squeal before Tracy urged her partner, presumably Wilson, to take her harder. I should have ended the conversation immediately, but I froze in place. I listened for another 2 minutes, long enough to hear. Tracy's partner emitted a growl indicative of his own orgasm. I terminated the call before the couple began to argue after sex, expressing regret that I was not on a landline so that my wife could hear me. If I had even the slightest doubt that I was acting appropriately, I would have ended the call. In accordance with the advice of my lawyer, I began recording all conversations with my wife. I felt my blood pressure rising as I listened to the call. I then called my father. The law confirmed his presence. I initiated playback of the audio recording on my mobile phone and allowed him to listen for a period of 3 minutes. I then terminated the call. I was almost certain that this would be the last occasion on which I would have to listen to this particular recording. I did not engage in any further acts of infidelity, unlike my wife. I did not utilize the resources of other individuals until the dissolution of our marriage became official. Even then, I did not facilitate a sexual encounter with another woman for over a year. I acknowledge that I experienced challenges in my social life. It had been 24 years since I had last participated in a social engagement, and I had no intention of pursuing romantic relationships again. Consequently, I did not remain informed about developments in the field of dating. This proved to be an ineffective strategy. Given that the dating world had become a distant memory for me, I was aware that my reluctance to date was largely self-inflicted. I was concerned that I might be caught off guard again. I loved Tracy and could not have predicted what would happen to me. There was no indication that anything would change. The only noticeable difference was the attitude of the women I dated. In the past, everything had been one-sided. The man selected a target and extended an invitation for a date. If the target accepted, the man would choose an activity and assume responsibility for all costs. In the current era, women appear to dedicate approximately half of their time to pursuing romantic interests or contemplating the ideal trajectory for a date. On occasion, they even assume financial responsibility for the entire experience. At times, I felt like a dinosaur attempting to catch up with the pace of modern dating. The experience highlighted that Tracy's abrupt shift in behavior was not an isolated incident but rather indicative of a broader trend. Today's dating landscape is characterized by a notable shift towards greater self-reliance among women. Many of them were focused on their own desires, even at the expense of their partner's needs. If it was beneficial for them, it would be beneficial for their partners and their loved ones. I have experienced this firsthand. I have no complaints about the physical aspects of sex with a woman in her 20s. The initial experiences were challenging, as I was unprepared for the level of physical intimacy. However, once I adapted, the level of pleasure increased significantly. I am not suggesting that Tracy was lacking in this area. However, at 45, she lacked the energy and flexibility of a 20-year-old. I was not as regenerative as a 20-year-old. Despite my advanced age, I was aware of certain techniques that would be likely to elicit a positive response from a female partner. However, my experience was not limited to relationships with younger women. I have been involved with women ranging in age from approximately 25 to 55. I might be described as an indiscriminate enthusiast, but I did tend to seek out partners who were approximately my own age. In terms of my own preferences, I had reached a point of comfort. It had been a busy week, and after concluding a meeting with a new client on the other side of town, I proceeded to the bar of an upscale hotel. Still attired in my suit, I sat on a high stool at the bar and ordered a single malt Glenmorangie, the cost of which was approximately $700. Upon entering the establishment, I observed a group of approximately 15 women from the bachelorette party seated at tables marked "Reserved." They were engaged in a boisterous and animated conversation. I chose to remain for a while to observe the proceedings and ordered food from the bar. The bride-to-be was the center of attention. I observed that she was a woman of approximately 25 years of age with waist-length light brown hair and large brown eyes. I admit that I am partial to long hair, so she initially captured my attention. I focused on her for a few minutes before directing my attention to the other partygoers. At that moment, I noticed her. I estimated her age to be approximately 40 years old. She appeared to be approximately 40 years of age, which led me to conclude that she was a companion for the evening, akin to an older mother hen who had been invited along to look after the younger chicks. My initial observation was that she seemed somewhat nervous in her mid-thigh length black skirt, which appeared to ride up slightly. As she sat in the chair, her legs were visible at a higher level than her torso. She attempted to pull up her skirt on several occasions, but was unsuccessful. I observed that her legs were attractive. Additionally, her breasts were notable, though not entirely concealed by the tight lavender silk blouse she was wearing. The blouse featured a V neckline that extended to the middle of her breasts, revealing a significant amount of skin. Her neckline was cut to reveal the midpoint of her substantial breasts, indicating that her alabaster skin was not frequently exposed to solar radiation. When she was not preoccupied with the length of her skirt, she was observed to be looking down at her chest, presumably to ascertain that her attire did not display an excessive amount of creamy skin. The ensemble was arguably somewhat youthful for her comfort, and it appeared to have been designed for her by one of the younger women in the group. I mentally commended the individual responsible for selecting it and encouraged her to wear it. The women seemed to be enjoying themselves, laughing, drinking, and eating. When the three-piece combo began to play, several of the women got up and started dancing with each other. The women dancing together appeared to encourage the other men at the bar to approach the women on the dance floor. Those sitting at the table, with the exception of their companion, also began to move. After approximately 10 minutes, I decided that the opportunity had arisen for me to approach her. The musical ensemble began to perform, and several of the women rose from their seats and began to dance with one another. The women who were dancing together appeared to encourage the other men at the bar to approach the women on the dance floor. Those who were seated at the table, with the exception of their companions, waited for approximately 10 minutes. When no one approached the escort, I concluded that the opportunity had arisen and approached her. She had shoulder-length hair. Her dark brown hair and bright green eyes evoked the image of Jacqueline Bisset during her heyday. Additionally, she was not adorned with a wedding ring. When I inquired about dancing with her, she initially appeared hesitant but eventually acquiesced. Several young women seated nearby expressed their condolences to her as she stood, adjusted her skirt, and accepted my hand. The initial 2 dances were brisk, and I was compelled to silently acknowledge my former partner's influence. My wife encouraged me to learn to dance, and the next dance was slow. I was somewhat surprised when she pressed her curvy body against me. Her hair smelled like white lies, a perfume not particularly popular among young women. We conversed briefly while we were sliding around the dance floor. I learned that her name was Kathleen Franks, the aunt of the bride and party attendant. She expressed her gratitude. I proceeded to dance with her, and subsequently, she began to walk off the dance floor after slow dancing. However, I took her hand and invited her to join me at the bar. She began to protest that she needed to keep an eye on her girls, but I pointed out to her that she could see them perfectly well from my seat at the bar. We proceeded to watch the young women and engage in conversation. I subsequently learned that she was actually 48 years old and divorced after 15 years of marriage. She informed me that her husband, a man of considerable means, had previously been married to a woman who was 27 years his junior. When he married her 3 years ago, he was already 48 years old. She also informed me that her outfit had been chosen for her by her niece and fiancé. She felt that it was somewhat youthful for her, given that she usually dresses more conservatively. I commented that her outfit suited her perfectly. I was surprised when I told her that I had loved her heels years ago. I was informed that women appear to genuinely appreciate receiving compliments regarding their footwear. She inquired, in a seemingly innocuous manner, whether I felt out of place in the aforementioned ensemble. I must acknowledge, however, that you exude a degree of physical attractiveness. Previously, I held a fondness for the pink blush hue, however, I have since developed a penchant for the deep red. We engaged in a discussion that spanned approximately 15 minutes. She became aware of my lack of a wedding ring and expressed curiosity regarding the circumstances surrounding it. She exhibited surprise when I revealed that my wife had never actually engaged in physical infidelity. I am, in fact, quite advanced in age. I informed her that she had cheated on me emotionally and was planning to do so physically. I was unable to trust her anymore. It is unethical to tell someone you love them while simultaneously intending to have sex with someone else. She concurred, stating that everyone should have a line in the sand. She returned to the bridal table a few minutes later but was more than receptive when I asked her to dance again about 30 minutes later. Once the evening's activities had concluded, she took my hand and led me back to the table where the other women were seated. In my estimation, the evening was a success, despite the fact that the young women were somewhat boisterous. I was taken aback when Katie extended an invitation for me to be her wedding date in 2 weeks' time. I had initially planned to attend alone, but I came to recognize the value in spending time with you. Despite our recent acquaintance, I felt a sense of familiarity with you. She informed me that she had already met with numerous other attendees, including several of the women who would be present at the wedding. She then stated that I would be doing her a great favor by accompanying her to the event, as she would otherwise be attending alone and would undoubtedly appear pitiful. I assured her that I would be delighted to attend the wedding with her. She then inquired as to my preferred color, and I suggested that she choose a suit that would complement it. She leaned towards me and kissed me on the lips. The chorus came from the other end of the table, lips, oh la la. I smiled brightly while Katie blushed again. I found myself contemplating the potential benefits of such a situation. I sat with Katie when we weren't dancing during one of these moments. As we sat at the table, I kept my eyes on the girls at the bachelorette party. Some of the attendees were evidently overindulging in alcohol. As the father of a teenage girl, I was in a position to act as a paternal figure towards the younger women in my vicinity. I observed the young man take one of the girls by the hand and begin to lead her towards I excused myself from the table and proceeded to the restroom in a brisk and silent manner. I arrived just as the young man was about to guide the girl to the men's room. The young man regarded me with disdain, seemingly unafraid of the older man in a shirt and tie. I acknowledge that I would never intimidate anyone at first sight, but I believe I am still in good physical condition. I endured my fair share of challenges as a child, and I am prepared to take the necessary action to ensure the safety of others when circumstances require it. It was my intention to protect the young girl from becoming the object of sexual exploitation at the hands of this individual. I would hope that someone would intervene to protect my daughter if the situation called for it. The man released my hand and attempted to remove himself from my presence. He then proceeded to verbally abuse me, stating, "Let go of my hand, old man." I informed him that she was of an age to engage in such activities if she so desired. I then released his hand but, with the other, I grasped his head and forcibly pressed it against the wall on the side of the door. I applied sufficient force to break the drywall and cause bleeding to his face, rendering him temporarily incapacitated. He then released the girl and ceased his advances. It appeared that the individual in question was no longer interested in pursuing the controversy. The atmosphere within the club became noticeably subdued as patrons became aware of the recent developments. As I began to escort Alicia back to the bachelorette party, Katie and the rest of the group approached us. They proceeded to take hold of the woman and escort her back to the table. I was left standing in close proximity to the restaurant manager and another employee. I initially believed that I was in some form of legal trouble. However, the manager extended his hand and expressed gratitude for my assistance in protecting the young woman. Law enforcement was promptly contacted, and the individual in question was taken into custody. It is likely that the authorities will request your cooperation in the investigation. I would like to hear your account of the events, but I do not believe you have anything to be concerned about. Furthermore, the cost of beverages for the remainder of the evening will be borne by the establishment. Thank you once more. That was quite the Wanda, the bride-to-be, said as I returned to the table. Thank you for paying attention not only to Aunt Katie. How did you see it? I was supposed to be the chaperone, and I had no idea what was going on. I feel rather awkward about this. It is not your fault, it is easy to lose track of 14 girls in a bar unless you are a professional security guard or a father. Fathers, at least most of us, have what I call a father's vision. I conversed with and joked with the women at the table until they decided to leave and spend the rest of the evening elsewhere. I kissed Katie softly on the lips as we said good night to each other, feeling somewhat pleased and having her number in my phone. One of the girls said, "Get a room," to the chorus of laughter from the group. I licked my lips and tasted Katie's lipstick as I watched the women leave the restaurant. I returned my drink to the seat at the bar where I had previously been seated. It appeared that you had done quite well. The bartender chuckled as I sat back down. Who would have thought? I answered with a laugh. I would appreciate a hen party so that I can celebrate my good fortune before I go. I have a new best friend, Sean. The bartender earned himself a double whiskey as his tip for the evening. Katie's dress for the wedding was light blue, so I wore my dark blue pinstriped suit, which I consider my Mio suit. I thought we made a beautiful couple, as did several of her. At the wedding, several individuals approached me to express gratitude for my care of Alicia. The bride had reportedly spent the previous 2 weeks extolling the virtues of my character, describing me as a hero, heroic, and beautiful, a remarkable combination. This was conveyed by Kathy's sister, Donna Fulham, the bride's mother, as she initiated our acquaintance before the wedding. She also expressed her appreciation for my assistance to the girls a few weeks prior and for enhancing her sister's reputation for discernment in choosing a partner. Additionally, I had the opportunity to interact with Katie's 24-year-old sister. A year-long process my daughter Marissa and her fiancé Ben. At least one of my parents is seeking romantic partners in elementary school. Marissa stated, when she met me, "Dad will definitely hate you if you stay here long enough to be introduced." By the time the reception ended, I was aware that Katie and I would become romantically involved. 1 month later, I introduced her to my children. My son quickly formed a close attachment to her, but my daughter was initially aloof. She was still displeased with me for divorcing her mother, despite the fact that your mother did not engage in infidelity. However, my son was able to comprehend the situation. He was in a committed relationship with a romantic partner. One evening, we engaged in a lengthy discussion about fidelity and its implications for each of us. My wife, Kathy, and I retired several years ago. We celebrated our anniversary with a cruise to Alaska with the assistance of Daily Cullies and Astroglide. We engage in sexual intercourse every morning before showering and beginning our daily activities. At our age, the primary objective is to establish a sense of connection rather than solely focusing on the physical aspect of the relationship. All three of our children are married and have achieved success in their respective fields. We have 6 grandchildren. I have only spoken to my former spouse on a few occasions. Since the dissolution of our marriage, my former spouse and I have had contact on approximately 24 occasions, including our children's weddings and Christmas holidays. She was married and subsequently divorced a second time. My children have informed me that she attributes her current circumstances to my actions. It should be noted that I did not engage in infidelity during the marriage. She continues to assert that some individuals are unable to comprehend her perspective.